But don't forget the past, where, okay, but I will nonetheless, don't be afraid. This is not another excuse, because I already caught myself yesterday in secretly, not even subconsciously, but half-consciously, playing the game of, fuck you, you will never get me to talk about Assemblage, you know, find something to postpone. So no, I will, today we do it. I just warn you, as I already did it, that it may be a little bit more boring. So, enough of all this. Now I go to Assemblage. I will just recapitulate yesterday's result, because what you got in the last 20 minutes was a more confused improvisation, I admit it, about what is missing for me in the notion of assemblage is the dimension of antagonism. You just get this Deleuzian, Spinozian, for me, happy plurality of heterogeneous elements combining, territorializing, deterritorializing themselves. No antagonism. I think one way to show the traces of this antagonism is to, I would like to quote you a nice remark on the 1960s. 1960s, you remember, as the time of sexual revolution and so on, from Grant Harman's book, Immaterialism. Harman says, I quote, "You have to remember," no, he quotes another guy, journalist, who said, writing about the 1960s, the spirit of sexual revolution and so on, "You have to remember that the 1960s really happened in the 1970s. What does he mean by this? Harman's comment, here it is. "An object somehow exists even more in the stage following its initial heyday. The marijuana smoking, free love, and internal violence of the dramatic American 60s were in some ways better exemplified by the campy and tasteless 1970s. And so on. So the idea is, again, what we identify 60s with, it really fully developed in the 1970s. I oppose this reading. Because, again, something disappears. What? Antagonism. Namely, if one takes a closer look, and I'm unfortunately old enough that I remember it personally, at the passage from 1960s to 1970s, one can easily see the key difference. In 1960s, the spirit of permissiveness, sexual liberation, counterculture, and drugs was part of a utopian political protest movement. And what happened in the 1970s was that this spirit remains, but in its vulgarized version, orgies, drugs, sexual liberation, but precisely, again, deprived of its political content, and as such, fully integrated into official ideology. Now, I'm not saying that, in a way, this was not good, in some sense. We should nonetheless, with all the criticism of the limitation of sexual liberation of the 60s and so on, we should nonetheless remember that the spirit of the 60s did leave some important traces in our popular culture. Like, at least officially, till now. Now with Trump, the horror is back up to a point. Like, it was simply not possible to talk in a certain way about women, about homosexuals, about other races, and so on. You know, you can, I remember still in the early 60s, when I was very young, it was simply possible publicly to make absolutely publicly dirty jokes about gay people and so on and so on. So certain standards emerged, but nonetheless, again, it was depoliticized. And this is for me ideological movement at its closest. We tend to forget, for example, in France, that 1960s, May 68, was not just sexual liberation and so on. It was a great political movement. I remember, I saw it on TV, I was watching it live in France. Thousands of students joining workers, I think, in front of the Renault car factory, doing it and so on. Okay, we may say they didn't have a chance, but it definitely was a great socio-political movement. And again, the way to the integration was that this social economic background, social antagonism, echoing it, simply disappeared. And something of the same, I think, helps for Renaissance. If you ask a person today, half educated as I am, Renaissance, give me an association, it would be all those princely states, Florence, all the big families, big names, and so on. But read a good history of Renaissance, and you will learn that in exact parallel with 1960s and 1970s, the thing truly happened already in the 14th century, and maybe early 15th. That was the true moment of Florence, with local democracy, much more lower class, and so on. And that political moment then disappeared with the passage to all those Sforzas, whatever, all those big prince families, prince states, and so on, which again totally obliterated this socio-economic dimension, where it was really class struggle. Local artisans, workers tried to take over in some cities, and so on and so on. So what I like is that, you see, the dialectics, very simple one that I try to describe. It's not simply that first something happens and then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. No. The first time it happens, it's much closer to the truth. A political, economic struggle, antagonisms, and so on. And then, the way things develop, the tendency appears to triumph, but the price is paid by the loss of this radical political dimension. So, this much as an introduction, just a remark. Now I want to go on. Returning to this notion of assemblage, because confused as I was yesterday, I simplified the notion very much. I would like to begin with, again, with Bruno Latour, his notion of what he calls Denkpolitik. Denk, the think in German, Politik, politics. So, what he calls politics of things. His idea is that today what we should learn, why assemblage theory is so useful for our political struggles, is that it not just, struggles are today not just struggles which turn around values, beliefs, and so on. They are struggles through and about things, how we deal with things, with new technological inventions, and so on. Stem cells, mobile phones, genetically modified organisms, pathogens, new infrastructure, new reproductive technology, and so on. This is creating a new world beyond just political institutions, political interests, or ideologies. This politics, Latour even calls it ontological politics, recognizes not only that what we usually call politics, ideological politics, we fight for different visions which should orient state politics, should always be viewed, and this is almost direct, even a little bit simplified Marxist view, that ideology should be always linked to concrete material practices, not just in the sense of Louis Althusser, that ideology only exists in material state ideological apparatuses, but also in the sense that the real base of, for example, can you even imagine the entire abortion debate and so on without all these tremendous inventions, contraception pills, new developments in medicine, and so on and so on? That it's always a struggle about very material processes. So, for this reason, when we analyze the state for example, that's Latour's big point, we should not conceive state as a unified actor, but it should be approached as an assemblage which makes heterogeneous points of order resonate together. Geographic order, ethnic, linguistic, economical, technological, legal, and so on and so on. So that this is the idea of assemblage, state as an assemblage. State, usually in our countries, provides education. It's not necessary. For example, in medieval times in Europe, it was the church. State organizes health service. As far as I know, again, in medieval times, usually you have, for the rich people, those big doctors traveling, okay, doctors, medical guys, and for the ordinary people in a poor village, I don't know, some local old lady who was either a good doctor or the other choice for her was to be burned as a witch or something like that. So what I'm saying is that we should see how many different phenomena and material practices, education, which, for example, again, till modern times, education was a family matter. Only at a certain point, education became the affair of first church, then family, and so on. So, the lesson of Latour here is that state comprises a series of heterogeneous phenomena which could have been assembled also in a different way. It's not a natural way to assemble them like that. Again, my next example, which I already mentioned yesterday, I think, in the domain of politics, look at Trump, the elements that consist, that are assembled in Trump ideology. You can easily imagine, for example, what Trump advocates, lower taxes for the rich. This measure is usually advocated on purely economic grounds, with all those, that pseudo-scientific bluffing, you know, that Laffer curve or whatever, which is pure imagination. You know, the idea being that if the taxes are too high, the state gets low income because it destimulates production. Then if taxes are again too low, of course you also get little money because taxes are too low. So that the art is, this is a standard neoliberal argument. The art is to find the right level of taxes so that you get maximum amount. But this is, as it was proven, a total pseudo-argument. It's a totally imaginary mathematics, because of course the point is then always that the state doesn't get enough money because taxes are too high. That if we lower the taxes, this will give an impulse to production and so on, and even the state will get more money and so on. What I want to say is that in its traditional form, this argument against high taxes is not linked in any way with Christian fundamentalism or with populism. This is something specifically Trumpist to establish this link. Another assemblage problem is, for me, something that is very dear to old leftists. Like, here I have usually a conflict with my good friend, the Israeli pro-Palestinian movie maker Udi Aloni, who always claims the struggle against Islamophobia and the struggle for women's rights are one and the same struggle. My cynical answer is, yes, it sounds nice, but what if they are not the same struggle? For example, it's a fact that today's feminism, not all, of course, but a strong part, for example, of American official feminism. As we know, they even supported invasion of Iraq. It will bring freedom to Iraqi women. Okay, we know today, if anything, it was the exact opposite. My God. Horrible as he was, no sympathy for Saddam Hussein. But under his regime, the position of women in Iraq was much better than now. Because he was at that point a secular autocrat who, supported a certain public role for women, public education and so on. I mean, education for women and so on. So what I'm saying is that quite often you use struggle for women's rights as an instrument of Islamophobia, and not to mention the other way around. Islamist politics dismissing women's rights as a tool of Western imperialism to ruin traditional non-European societies. It's incredible, it's very sad to watch to what extent, I quote this somewhere, I think, or mentioned it already to you. I met in London 2 years ago somebody who didn't want to admit it but was close to Boko Haram. And he told me that he is fundamentally anti-capitalist, but that the way to fight global capitalism is to fight the concrete effects of neo-global ideology in his country. And he claimed in his country, northern Nigeria, Mali, the central part of Africa, the main effect of globalist neo-colonial ideology is ruining the local indigenous family and so on structures through the ideology of women's rights. So he claimed, for us, fighting against women's rights, it's our version of anti-colonial struggle. Now it's easy to say you are wrong, but what would you have done there? What I'm trying to say here is simply that it's easy to pose, and we should stick to it, of course. It's easy to pose it as a goal. This struggle and that struggle should become one and the same struggle. But the big struggle is to bring these two struggles together. It's an assemblage in this sense. Now, let me go on and do a little bit of self-critique of what I said yesterday. You remember when I compared assemblage, to Laclau's theory of end moves, they collaborated here, to the and Chantal moves, to the Laclau and move theory of hegemony. And I claim that Laclau has a similar idea that an ideological field is constructed through a specific articulation where a series of relatively independent of each other elements are put together into what Laclau calls a chain of equivalence. For example, in a classical Marxist socialist vision, the struggle of women, the struggle for ecology, anti-racist struggle, are all put into the same series with anti-capitalist struggle. In the sense, you know, to put it in very simplest terms, like the standard Marxist explanation would have been ecology is, our environment is exploited in capitalist conditions because capitalism ultimately only cares about profit and so on and so on. Or that women are exploited or in the subordinate position in capitalist patriarchy, and then they try to explain why, in what sense, capitalism needs patriarchy. Or racism, again, the same logic. Of course, any intelligent Marxist would reject the idea that, but the criticism of Marxism is justified here. Any intelligent Marxist would reject the idea that this means just that we, as Marxist revolutionaries, should tell, for example, to women or to other races, so wait a little bit, let's focus on the big central struggle and, as it were, feminine liberation or a different attitude towards nature on the end of racism will come by itself as a side product, byproduct of basic anti-capitalist struggle. Of course, we should reject this, but nonetheless, in some sense, all these other struggles are put under hegemony of anti-capitalist struggle. Okay, I will not go here into what how Ernesto at the end rejects this hegemonic role of anti-capitalist struggle. For him, all struggles are ultimately not equal, but at the same level, in the sense that none of the struggle has, if I may put it like this, the natural right to play the hegemonic role. In a certain constellation, it can be political struggle for democracy. In another constellation, it can be ecological struggle. In a third constellation, it can be anti-racist struggle, whatever. The point is that how these struggles are enchained into a series of equivalencies. By series of equivalencies is, I mean what I just exemplified to you through my example of classical Marxist anti-capitalism, where I can tell you, but struggle for women, for women's rights, struggle for nature, struggle against racism. They are all part and have their full meaning only as subsumed under anti-capitalist struggle. This would have been the classical Marxist chain of equivalences. Ernesto would have said, no, the field is totally open. There is no, when Ernesto, criticizes class essentialism, his idea is precisely that we cannot a priori assume there is no, how should I put it, natural or deeper tendency to privilege one struggle. It's a contingent process of unification, of assemblage of struggles, where we can decide which struggle will play the hegemonic role. And Marxists here, good Marxists, were honest and very open. For example, third world Marxists, intelligent ones, were very clear that, especially Fanon and others who reflected on how West European communist parties in the 50s reacted to anti-colonial struggles. Many of them reflected to it in a racist way. For example, did you know that till 1960 almost, the official politics of the French Communist Party was, no, French colonization of Algiers, because it was focused on Algiers because there was anti-colonial movement in Algiers, is basically a progressive thing. If we give independence to Algiers, it would just mean that the conservative structure there will take over. So we should offer Algerians equality, but within French democratic dominance and so on. They were against decolonization. Only later, in the 60s, and the traces of this patriotic, falsely patriotic, bourgeois patriotic, French communist attitude lasted till, well, as long as the Communist Party lasted. Now it's extremely marginal and so on. It's so interesting I remember it how when the first problems with immigrants developed some 20, 30 years ago, it was quite scandalous to discover that the harshest, the proto-Le Pen figures, the harshest were some local authorities, you know, all that, at that point it existed, Red Belt, Saint-Denis and so on, around Paris. Small suburban towns where often communists were running the towns, one majority. They were the first one to cut electricity and water to immigrants and so on, because they played French patriotism and so on and so on. So, back to this point. For example, I totally agree with Fanon, who said that to really fight the class struggle means that in certain concrete constellation, you should privilege national liberation struggle over class struggle. This is the fine dialectical point, that radical struggle means that you have, class struggle means that you should also know in what constellation you should neglect strategically class struggle. It's the same today in the United States with Black Lives Matter. Many white liberals escape into an easy option and claim, why only black lives matter? Shouldn't all lives matter? No, this universalization is already false. Because in concrete American situation now, the social injustice of authorities killing people and so on is exemplified in how they treat black protesters. So the moment you want to universalize the position and say, no, we should care about all the, you already play the game of those in power. And you know, my God, a movie should be written about it, or a tragicomic episode. Did you listen to what happened now a couple of weeks ago in the United States, that there was some conflict between white policemen and black demonstrators, and that a black policeman who was their colleague ran there. He was in his civil clothes there by chance on a private business. He saw what's going on, and out of pure professional solidarity, he ran to that post to help his white policemen colleagues, and they shot him, mistaking him for a black threat and so on. It's brutal irony. But again, so what I'm saying is that, okay, I agree, where is my problem, and what was my, I'm now in this Stalinist self-critical mood. What was my, I just praised yesterday Laclau because of how he has also assemblage in the sense of putting different elements together, but he has assemblage together with antagonism. Assemblage is for him always a moment of constructing an us, but us against them. It's always the big conflict, and whom will be included. And this is a big problem. For example, one of the lowest moments of European working class movement, even the left is not totally innocent in it, is that in certain constellations, they risk the game of playing with anti-Semitism. They claimed, but nonetheless, there is a working class element in anti-Semitism. Okay, they focus on Jews, not generally on the capitalists, but nonetheless, popular anti-Semitism is an element of popular protest against the rich and so on. So why not use it? No wonder that Ernesto remained a Peronist to the end, because that's nonetheless, I never got this sympathy of many people in Argentina for Peronism. They did some good things, some incredible things. For example, we can make fun of Evita Peron, but I found this so tremendously ingenious, and as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, she was the first one to do it. I think already before her death, 51. You know that Argentina was, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the first country in the world which gave all employed women 2 days every month for their period of 3 days, Hollywood. What did you say, Hollywood? Don't ask me what this means. What I want to say is that I find this a wonderful, simple measure she taught, and many other things. But basically, Peronism was a soft fascist movement for me, because the basic vision is unity of capital and work, and some external intruders, capitalists, communists, whoever, are trying to undermine this solidarity. So let's forget this. I hope you noticed it. I was mad at myself that I didn't get it yesterday. What's the big difference, nonetheless, where I am on the side of Latour and so on? Laclau's chain of equivalences remains strictly at the level of ideology. Ideology in the sense of mental construct and practices and so on. When he speaks about chain of equivalences, of assembling elements, it's simply ideological elements. It's, for example, ecologism as an ideological trend, it's women's rights, but as an ideological trend, and so on and so on. What is missing in Ernesto? Okay, he would have said, but I mean it. Well, fuck you, I don't care what you mean, but what you say. What is missing is precisely what Bruno Latour mentions as Ding politique, the politics of things. That's what I find extremely productive in assemblage theory. This mixing all of it together, you know. Through assemblage, it's not just politics and, it's not just like, I don't know, economic struggle, democratic struggle, whatever. This is still ideology. These are ideological conflicts. You have to put into assemblage also, for example, material practices of assemblage, of assembling. Judith Butler, recently, I have problems with that book, although it's a nice problem. This is more in the spirit of assemblage. Wrote a book where assemblage is in the title, I think, no?
Yes, assemblage.
Yeah, but what she means, that's my problem. I will tell you, and we can debate it if you agree with me. She doesn't mean assemblage in the terms of assemblage theory. She means assemblage in the literal sense of, and she is in a way right, the last 10 years demonstrated again how assemblage in the simple sense of large groups of people assembling in some public space and occupying it and so on, how this proves an important political strategy. My only problem is the usual one that I mentioned here on the first day, I think. Yes, it's important as the first step, but what interests me is what happens when people are no longer assembling in public places, you know, like what remains of it. But I agree here with Judith when she speaks about at this level. When she speaks about assemblage, she means a very material political practice. Okay, you can say this is still ideological practice, practice of protest. But nonetheless, she means a very material process of hundreds of thousands, even more people assembling with a certain demand, you know, all that stuff of we are here, we will not leave till we get. And here, I don't have time to go into it. What would have interested me here tremendously is the notion of majority at work here. Let me formulate to you some of my deep pessimism. Are we aware that, now I'm ready to go to the end, crazy. When we are speaking about these popular upheavals, popular presence, were they ever really a majority? I claim practically never. Take French Revolution. Fuck it, it was basically people in Paris. Maybe not even their majority. Take October Revolution. Are you crazy? It was Bolsheviks in a, but it was still authentic revolution. Bolsheviks calculating on how to use political public discontent, which was very clearly articulated in their big slogan, Land and Peace.
Even the Central Committee was against it on 25th of October. Lenin had to walk out. Kamenev and Zinoviev published a protest letter the same night. And in Gorky's newspaper, which came back against them, as you know.
And even more, the greatest genius of 20th century, I mean it ironically, Stalin disappeared for those couple of days. This was the big secret of Stalin. He was nowhere there. Do you know that?
Well, he was an editor of Pravda.
Yeah,
so well, I don't know. Well, I'll have to look into it.
Yeah, he was
your point stands that you can't even, it's even more radical than what you say.
Yeah.
It's not even possible to speak about a majority within the Central Committee.
Yeah, even there, yes.
There is virtual, it's really one of those throws of a dice where Lenin throws his fit, essentially, as he did throughout this, saying,
you know who was also, you must know it, you maybe know it better than me. My favorite example, you know, even Nadezhda Krupskaya, his wife, wrote, I think, to Kamenev, it looks that Vladimir Ilyich will look psychiatric help, that he is getting crazy.
She's been saying that since May of 1917, when he comes back from Switzerland in the German train, and starts saying, hey, we got to convert this revolution into a proletarian one.
Yeah.
And all the people around him, they're saying, like, Vladimir Ilyich has been gone since 1905, he lost his mind, we really need to, you know, kind of go along with it, and they censor his writings.
I know, but what is here so interesting for me is that nonetheless, to put it in the spirit of this assemblage theory, then you have the, sorry for to use this old Marxist cliché, the bourgeois reading is that we can see here how October Revolution was just a Lenin's coup d'etat. No, it's not as simple as that. If you read a good history of October Revolution, you can see that what saved Lenin was not just how he, in a good sense, through his personal force, terrorized finally members. There was a popular support for him. You know, very limited in big cities. There was some, otherwise you don't do it. There was some popular support. Many people in factories and so on. Yes. I know they wanted more. They wanted more. But what I'm saying is that...
But your point stands, but it's a very complicated...
I know, absolutely. But I want to say this, that, do we agree at this, that No revolution, not even Cuban, whatever you want, Chinese, followed this model. Finally, the majority took arms and so on and so on. Can you give me one example?
Sure, in March 1917.
You mean February?
Right, February Revolution in Russia. Yeah.
Even there, you know, what do I mean people? Who were these people? It was basically...
It was an assemblage, but a striking contrast to
17.
the October events.
Yeah, but I'm still for October.
Sorry?
I'm still for October. I think that...
No, I just want to throw this in because it's important, I think, in the evolution of the Bolshevik discourse about this event, October 25th, right? The term that was always used even to my days, which are the 80s, is переворот. Октябрьский переворот. October turnover. I'm just translating it directly. They wouldn't call it a revolution themselves. So this is the Bolshevik discourse itself acknowledged that the October events were not revolution. They were not revolution.
No, okay, I see your point, but
we had to. I mean, they had to wait until 1927
to
10 years to call it Великая Октябрьская революция.
But that's so nice because at 27 it was basically over. It was Stalin.
Right. So I'm just saying.
No.
So give me one example, and the example.
Yeah, but even there, you know, I would even complicate that example because okay, the majority was against the Tsar, but what did they want positively? It gets blurred, everything.
Okay, I'll stop it.
Okay. No, but what I wanted to say is that if you look at all revolutions, there is a minority, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not opposed to it, I'm still for it. But let's be clear what is happening. A minority seizes the opportunity. For example, look at allegedly authentic from my country, Yugoslav revolution. Partisans used German occupation as an excuse to do communist revolution, and now what we are learning now, it's very dark, is that they went even too far. This is maybe the darkest moment of partisan struggle in Yugoslavia. You know that in late 42, early 43, when Allies got all Africa, they were preparing a landing in the south of Europe. And for some time they oscillated between Sicily, Italy. For some time they preferred to do it in the Istrian Peninsula, that is to say, to go directly through the Adriatic Sea and to hit in the north of the Adriatic Sea in what is today Croatia and Slovenia, and to cut through there directly to Austria. You know what happened at that point? It's now officially admitted, even by historians who are fully sympathetic to communist cause. Tito immediately sent messengers to Ustashi and to German army. Let's be ready if Allies invade there, Americans, English, Istria, together with German army, we throw them out. It was so clear that for him, this mattered. For him, the whole point was who will get power afterwards. So I'm just trying to say this, that we should not mystify, or take the example of, for example, of, you remember those in Cairo, what is there, the big square? No, Tahrir is in Cairo, sorry, in Istanbul, Geza Square or what? Yeah, we were so enthusiastic, yes, but it was always a minority. It was always a minority. Now, I'm not saying the majority has right. No, I'm in the side of minority. But I think we should have no illusions about how assemblage in a political situation like this works. You always, in a way which is a little bit cheating, but it's justified, the name of this cheating is politics, you use this universal pretext, struggle for liberation and so on, to take power. Which is why communists, they were very intelligent here. I read memoirs of some old communists. I report this in one of my books. I spoke with him and I asked him, if in 46 there were to be in ex-Yugoslavia, immediately after World War II, really free elections, who would have won? I told him, you would have won. You were still genuinely popular. Why didn't you allow free elections? You know what he told me? Yes, we would have won, but then people would get used to this election. What about next elections? Like, they were absolutely aware that in the long term they would have lost. But, okay, let's drop it this. All I'm saying is that even when we are talking about political assemblage in the sense of bringing them all together and so on, it's always a question of a limited minority getting the initiative, seizing the moment. Which is why, and I'm so sorry, okay, I will give you another example here. I will not have time, not even an example, just send you to one text of mine. If you again go to that Los Angeles Review of Books, about a month and a half ago, I published there a text, Lenin navigating, okay, go to Google, put my name, L-A-R-B, Lenin navigating, and you will get it. Where I found something so incredibly, almost tragicomic again. When, in his most radical work, when he was dreaming, Lenin, about this direct democracy, every cook can run a state. And it's very interesting, I read some good analysis. What term Lenin uses there? It's not a cook.
It's for a woman.
Yeah, the woman who helps there. In the, yeah, that specific term. Okay, but you know what is so interesting? Again, I will not bore you with it now. Look at my text there. He says, he almost becomes, I say this without any irony, a Habermasian Lenin. He says, what will happen then after the revolution is that, I'm quoting Lenin, normal rules of decent, polite communication, which are now distorted by class relations, will be asserted and will regulate society. So he literally refers to some. He even says, Lenin, it's part of human nature to talk freely, openly, democratically, argument, and that this we will get the pure structure of communication, what Habermas would have called undistorted, zwangslos communication. So, okay, let's drop this, let's stop this. I hope you got my point. My point is that where I am critical of Laclau, and some people even criticized me, and maybe up to a point they are right. Their argument is this one, that societies run at two levels. On the one hand, societies function through ideological struggles. We fight struggles for which story will predominate, interpretation, and so on and so on. But at the same time, it's what Bruno Latour called politics of things. Not just in the brutal sense of how production is going, but also all the technological invention, or even daily matters, how we deal with each other, in sexuality, at the level of friendship, and so on, which are always grounded in ideology, but has a dynamics of its own. For example, how, we can go on to endless examples here. For example, how did lately all these technological inventions of first a long play records, then CDs and so on, how did all this change our entire perception and practice of listening to classical music? It functioned till 60, 70 years ago in a totally different way, and so on. So again, this is, I think, what Latour means with politics of things. All the impact of technological inventions and so on, and even speak about the latest of them. I checked today, I think, on Guardian this morning. You're also thinking about dirty things, no? That those, how do you call them, my God, the sex robots, you know. There is now a big debate that if you allow sex robots, some people claim that this will help brutal people who like to torture partners and so on, like they can do it now on a doll, you know. Other people claim this is a scandal and so on, you know. I would I agree with critics, but on the top of it, again, this is an example of politics of things. Okay, you can get better and better sex robots with total plasticity and so on. But how will this affect our interhuman relations? I am here not simply a pessimist, but my position is more mixed here. What worries me is that we will not have, here are interpersonal relations and there are, you do it with some plastic partner, or even better, more in a southern way, not even a whole partner. You know, we can buy a mouth, a vagina, an asshole, whatever, and you combine them and so on. How will this affect our sexual practice? The problem I see is that, again, that first, this technical replacement, that is to say, plastic artificial props instead of another human body, is not something that concerns only technology. It's a certain universal stance where instead of a partner, you get what Lacan calls partial objects, and you enjoy through them. I claim that the true danger is that we will either begin, and we already do it, to treat real partners if we still use them in this way. For example, that's what is happening with Marquis de Sade. Here he was a prophet. It's clear that for him, all those sex objects, men, women, tortured, and so on, are not, it's a question to what extent they are even treated as persons, or it's only a collection of partial objects. Now, the solution to this enigma is not a simple one, because I claim that at some level there are persons. Why? Because remember always, as Lacan emphasizes, the point of sexual sadism is never simply to reduce your partner to an object and torture him, but by reducing it to an object, to provoke shame in him or her, or it to humiliate him. There is no sadist pleasure without this awareness of, look how totally humiliated he or she or it is. So this is why Lacan says, in a nice way, that insofar as this reaction, he is treating me as an object, I'm totally humiliated. Insofar as this is a typical subjective reaction, Lacan's point is that the sadist constitutes his victim as a subject. Of course, not a subject in this fashionable sense today, an agent who controls its fate, but on the contrary, a subject in this sense of radical self-division. Am I dead? How is it possible? You simply cannot accept what is happening to you. So again, at this level, I think we should operate with the unity of Denkpolitik, politics of things, and ideological politics. And the question we should ask, for example, apropos all this sexual object, plastic, sexual, robotic, whatever we call them, sexual objects, what do they mean? How will they be subjectivized? Again, my thesis is that you cannot say, oh, you can have a real relation with another full-blown person, and then, if you want just a partial satisfaction, you do it with a plastic freak, and so on and so on. No, it doesn't work in this way, because the moment, again, you shift to plastic thing, and the whole notion of subjectivity changes, and it's so interesting. And here you can see the deep truth of Lacan's statement that Kant was a sadist. Do you know that this idea of reducing your sexual partner to a partial object to be exploited is explicitly found already in Kant? You would be surprised.
His definition of marriage.
Sorry?
His definition
and
of
then
marriage.
on the next page, you know, yes, First, it's his definition. You know how Kant is beautiful. Don't tell me that philosophers are stupid and naive. You know how Kant defines marriage? A mutual contract between two adult persons for the mutual exclusive use of their each other's sexual organs for pleasure. So it's none of this deep spiritual union, like you have a piece in your body that I need, I have a piece that you need, let's cut the crap, that's it. We made a contract. But then you will say, this is a joke, hey. This is in Metaphysics of Morse, Metaphysique d'Argy. Part 1, marriage, but then go to the next page, and there you find why Kant is great. When Kant asks a crazy question, which is, so if a husband runs away from his wife, it's incidentally a little bit male chauvinist that he uses this example, but I think the opposite example would maybe also work. Kant asks, does the wife have the right to call police to bring her husband back? And Kant says yes, but you know why? Not because of the moral unity. He says because the husband ran away with a piece of property, his penis, which according to the contract was her co-property. You know, it's purely in legal terms. Like, sorry for the day. I'm married to you, I ran away, you sent police, not I want you as a person, but sorry guy, you ran away with a part of my property, you know. Here you have, again, it's, we could go further, but okay, let's stop it. You got my point. I am for Latour and all those guys against this all too ideological politics, which, or again, at the level of digitalization, what does this mean? This politics of things. I think I already maybe even improvised about this here. Think about digitalization and forget about all those scare stories, control. Just think about this. I'm here referring to a cheap best-selling book. It's Yuval Harari, Homo Deus. He's very naive, but at a certain point he makes a good point, which is this one. With the control that we already have today, if you allow yourself to be digitally controlled, everything is tracked, your health record, your opinions, blah, blah. On average, a computer can make a better decision than you on what you should do. Not in the sense, not on behalf of some higher social Stalinist knowledge, but precisely following your own interests. For example, already today, already they are not yet developed. If you allow a computerized machine to measure, take your blood, blah, blah, and make a diagnostic, nobody is saying that computers are perfect. They are just saying that, and they are right, that on average, the diagnosis of a computer will be definitely much better than an average diagnosis of a real human doctor. The same point, and I love this experiment, marriage. I read that they made an experiment in the United States where they convinced couples who were confronting the prospect of marriage to be totally digital, controlled, computer recorded their messages and whatever. And then they didn't tell them. That was the deal. But the computer made a judgment, should they marry or not. The computer was 95% right. For example, the couple decided to marry, the computer discreetly, they didn't let the couple know. Make a judgment, no. They will divorce in 1 to 2 years. The computer was practically always right. They even made a political experiment. Some people allowed so that their opinions were registered and so on. And then when voting came, they voted. But it can be easily proven that the actual votes of individuals were so influenced by some last-minute spinning and so on, that if you allow the computer to cast a vote for you, the vote would have been much better, not with regard to some objective social interests, but with regard to your own long-term interests of which you were usually even aware, and so on. So we do have a problem here. Literally, And it's not some prophetic vision, whatever. Because the idea of liberal democracy is nobody can know about us better than we ourselves. We need machines, blah, 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 but ultimately you yourself are the one who looks deep into your heart and decide what's best for you. No. Empirically, computers can do it. Now comes, I will stop this line so that I don't get lost, I claim it's a nice Lacanian point here. Because the idea is this one, but we are losing in this way our freedom, our spontaneity, will we become puppets of the machines, and so on and so on. No, I think, I would have to go too much into theory here, but just to give you a hint, I think that, you know, when we interact with each other, as Lacan would have put it, we always interact against the background of what Lacan calls the big other, this purely virtual, non-existing, in the sense that it doesn't really exist out there. It's just a pure normative symbolic structure. That's the big other, which is again purely virtual. It doesn't exist. But it structures our opinions, it overdetermines our acts, and so on and so on. So, I claim that what happens with digitalization is that, as I already mentioned to you, you remember about Pokemon. How? In Pokemon, the implicit ideological structure, which, for example, makes me, if I'm a racist, I meet an Arab, I see him a potential terrorist, whatever, terrorist, raping women, whatever. But what happens with digitalization and with Pokemon, in a way, is that this structure, which was implicit, non-substantial, becomes a real object in the world. It's no longer the big other. It's a machine really existing out there. So that I claim that would be my paradox. We would not, what is threatened by radical digitalization is not the freedom of ourselves. The freedom of ourselves is more or less an illusion, and this illusion is kept in place. Like, did I use it here? I think I did it, because I used it so many times anywhere. My favorite example, I think, did I in last 2 days, that example of a rat which is remote controlled? I think I did. Did I?
No.
Okay, but you all know it. I will be very brief. You know that my friends, I have evil friends who send this to me. So to me, how you can already do this. You take a rat, you can connect the nerves which give signals to its limbs to a computerized machine, and it's wonderful. The rat changes into a remote-controlled car. That is to say, the rat is running around. Wouldn't you like, Maria? Such a nice. I would like. Do you have a favorite pet animal, cat? And then I will control that cat. Better not to think what she will do to you. Okay, let's go on. What I want to say is that the horror is this one. You press a button and then you can steer the rat. Okay, now I like my friends because they are evil. What do I mean by this? They went a step further and discreetly, they're afraid to go into public. They did the same experiment with a human being. You can do it. It's very primitive because you don't have to control the brain. Just the neurons which regulate your movement, it can be done. And of course, what interested them is this. Let's say I walk here around. And then you, let's say, you are evil. You press a button and you can steer me, you know. The problem is, how will I experience this? Will it be, oh my God, some foreign power? No, that's the crazy situation. I would still think that I'm free. And you know what a Greek leftist friend of mine, you will hate me for me, told me. This explains Tsipras. Tsipras is controlled by European banks like this now in Greece. Okay, let's drop that, the situation is complex there. But what I want to say is that if it's only the question of this external control, you can always say, because that's our usual defense. Like if somebody tells you, but do you know that about your sexual passion or freedom, there is nothing really free about it, it's all your neuronal processes, you can still say, I don't care, this is happening simply outside my scope, but in my mind I feel free, passion, whatever, that's it. That's true. That's not threatened. What is threatened is the big other. What is threatened is that the agency through which I am controlled is no longer a purely virtual symbolic agency, which is nonetheless linked to my subjectivity. In the sense that if I disappear, the big other also disappears. What do I mean by this? Let me give you here another example from object-oriented ontology. Graham Harman likes to develop this idea that things exist independently of their effects. And I almost like this line of him because it's so it runs against our intuition, no? That things are not just their effects. This is incidentally the big opposition between Harman, this hardline, object-oriented ontology, and Latour and those action network theory. Action network theorists are more dynamic, lateral, and so on. Things are their effects. Things exist and are constituted through their performativity. Things are not substantial entities which pre-exist their activity. Now, in an apparently crazy way, Harman opts for the opposite conclusion. I quote him, things pre-exist their activity rather than being created by it. Interestingly, his main argument is change. He claims that if things are reducible to their relations, then all their potentials are always already actualized in these relations. So that exactly the fact that things cannot be reduced to their actualized relations with others, that they have potentials which they fail to actualize and so on. This is what opens up the possibility of change, because in a change situation they may actualize their relations. I sympathize here with Harman, although, of course, I don't share his substantialism. I think that he constructs a false opposition here. In what sense? I claim that things can be purely relational, in the sense of they don't pre-exist their relations in which they act, but that out of a purely relational entity still can possess a certain autonomy, a certain, let's call it like this, hidden side. That relations can, out of assemblage relations, an entity can emerge which has a depth of its own, hidden potentials and so on. I think Harman here builds a wrong opposition, and I will give you an example here. Especially of, and it's strange that Harman does not elaborate this distinction. I think the first thing to do here is, of course, to distinguish between material objects, which in some sense, up to a point, there it's also debatable, exist independently of relations. It's not as simple as that, but let's say stupidly, if we all leave this room, this chair will, hopefully, I'm not so sure, will remain here. Like, in this primitive sense, this chair has a certain substantial being. But it's clear that what Hegel calls geistige, spiritual formations, they are more radically, purely relational. To put it in very simplified terms, think about communism, or fascism, or liberalism. Communism exists only insofar as there are people fighting for it or against it. If you, sorry for the sadistic undertone, if you liquidate all people who deal with communism, there will be no communism. But you know what's the point of Hegel? Nonetheless, it's the cause. We fight for communism, we fight against communism, we die for communism. And Hegel is here against nominalism. We cannot say communism is just an illusion. In reality, we just fight with each other. No. Communism, again, is a purely relational entity. It exists only that's the big other, as a symbolic presupposition of our acts. I fight for communism. Communism doesn't exist. But although it's in this sense purely relational, its affects an actual causality. I really fight for communism. There are virtual non-existing causes. And so the point I want to make is that you remember all those analyses. Don't be afraid, I'm not a right-winger, I'm still a communist. But all those analyses, or the same analyses were made also about liberalism, which is the same virtual cause we are fighting for. You know, all those analyses like, where do the so-called totalitarian potentials of communism come from? I think that nonetheless, although I don't agree with the simplistic versions, that this is a quite legitimate line of questioning. It's totally justified to raise the question, was there already some kind of a, if not route, an opening for space for what later exploded as Stalinism already in Marxist vision of communism itself and so on. So you see how an entity which is purely relational can also have a hidden side and so on. This paradox, I think, that's the mistake of Harman. I think, maybe you can confirm me or not if you read the thin book Immaterialism. Harman thinks that from the fact that an object has a certain ontological autonomy, that it has to be non-relational. Yes?
But isn't he harnessing that to Meillassoux collapse of correlationism, to do with the archifossil, which is in this deep ancestral space? You know that book, Infinitude, where he makes the argument that, you know it, I'm sure, that the fossil in this deep ancestral space, before humans, they've been able to measure its radiation in relation to the Big Bang, and on the basis of that, there's something that is not a correlative subjectivity, even though mathematics and technology is used to measure the radiation. And that's how they produce this,
Now you raised an extremely complex ontological question. The first thing I would say is that, and Meillassoux does deal with this problem, I think he squeezed it out too easily. The first problem I see is that, nonetheless, although of course Meillassoux is right, the only way to take science seriously is to accept that it literally talks about, for example, reality before we humans were there, and so on and so on. But nonetheless, a hermeneutician would make a point, yes, but nonetheless, the way you talk about that reality is always transcendentally predetermined by your horizon of understanding. In this sense, it remains ultimately relational. So, of course, there are architraces and so on. But, now I will give, probably you know it, my ultimate answer. It's my favorite case of ideology. You know what I'm referring to, Stephen Jay Gould, and that wonderful reply to Darwin. I think the guy, British priest, should be given a posthumous medal, Ultra Nobel Prize for Theory of Ideology. You know, Darwin had a good friend who was, I forgot his name, sorry, I knew it, who was very sympathetic to him, to Darwin. And he was deeply disturbed by Darwin's discovery because he saw it immediately. Darwin is talking about something that should have really happened. Like, it's not just God created that, okay, he had to confront this, that the Bible literally cannot be right. The moment you have fossils, which you can prove today even much more explicitly through the atomic decay measuring and so on, that they are millions years old. So it cannot be that the world was created, I laugh, my other, was it the same? No, it was earlier. One English theologist who said, I love this, that the world was created the year minus 4,000 and something. He even added in the late morning. You know, like, God had a good English breakfast and then now we create the world. But what, you know what was this guy's solution? First, what Darwin proves is conclusive. No way. He is not wrong. Second, God also cannot be wrong. If it says in the Bible, you know, if you take into account all the generations that our universe was created, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, that's it. And you must know the conclusion, no? You don't know it, then oh my God, that's so nice. And you're getting senile like me, so I can repeat all jokes. You know. The solution is beautiful. Is that to dupe us, God directly created fossils. It's like, you know, when you want to create the illusion of openness on stage often, you know how in opera it happens in a big field. There is no field, but you paint a perfect image of an open field. In the same sense, we live in a very small world, but God consciously created a fake appearance of openness. He staged reality for us. Now, of course, this is madness. But it's a madness which is the best definition, one of the best definitions, I claim, of the theory of ideology. Doesn't every ideology do exactly this? Every epoch creates its fossils, in the sense of writes its own prehistory and so on. Now, I'm not a subjectivist. I'm not saying there is nothing really before and so on. I'm just saying that like when you want to qualify really what is before, you always get this type of hermeneutic circle. For example, are these things? Quantum physics is teaching us, I'm too stupid, I don't know if it's true or not, but if we are to take it seriously, that what exists outside our mind are pure relations, either you call them string or other terms, and you know that the quantum physics vision is not that things interact, but that in some form or another we have interaction of forces, waves, and on the opposite, things, material objects, are just points where different wave interactions collapse or meet each other. So again, it's not things interact, it's that interactions create things. And here I find he was often criticized for this. Meillassoux problematic when, from his basic insight, how through contingency, through radical contingency of being, you can break out of transcendental circle. From here, he all of a sudden jumps into, I think, a way too quick Cartesian rationalist realism when he says that only nature, as described in mathematical formulas, exists in itself. I don't see the reason why. I think he jumps way too quickly there. And I think, if I may give the same reading of him as Bruno Bostiles gave of me, when interpreting my tics and so on as the effect of my deep psychological uncertainty, I think that maybe this is the reason why Meillassoux, he is an extremely nice, bright, even a genius and honest person, has such problems in publishing his next work. I admire him. I publish every shit that I, as you know, right, practically. You know that he has for years over 1,000 pages of manuscript L'Inexistence Divine.
His dissertation.
Sorry?
It's his dissertation.
Yeah, but you incidentally. Yeah. And he knows, he's well aware how unsure he is. So again, Meillassoux is far from simple anti-transcendentalist. He is deeply aware that his type of realism is accessible only through transcendental dimension and so on and so on. But okay, I don't want to go too far into it now. So just, but this brings us to another point. I agree with you, which is okay. First, I said where I agree with. It's okay. We have time. Where I agree with assemblage theory against these purely ideological theories of politics. I mean, with all his insistence on ideological struggle, real fights, for Laclau, politics remains politics of ideology. It's a question of recombining ideological elements and so on and so on. There is no dimension of politics of things. Laclau's answer would probably have been, and here I'm on the side of assemblage theory, Laclau's answer would probably have been that, things are just things. They exist, but for them to have any political effect, they must be somehow ideologized. You know, the things in themselves are not a political fact. While Latour is right in pointing how, apropos all these technical inventions and so on, no, there is a certain, literally, politics of things. Not only in the sense that things like all those plastic sexual robots or digital means of communication, not only that they have political effects, but that they in themselves already materialized a certain interpersonal politics. Like our digital universe is not simply apolitical, it embodies a set of presuppositions of how we communicate, of how we interact, and so on and so on. So here, my heart is with immaterialists. Now we come to the crucial point where I nonetheless have some problems. I wonder if you would agree. I now move into this transcendental topic. By transcendental, I mean, this is the classical transcendental argument of how the way we approach reality is always already over-determined by a certain horizon of understanding, as hermeneuticians would have put it. And you don't have to understand this in this classical idealist tradition. I claim that the entire deconstructionism still moves at this level. In this sense, the ultimate transcendental philosopher is Michel Foucault for me. Why? What is Foucault's Michel Foucault's ultimate position of his notion of episteme and so on? It's that, again, I'm repeating myself from a couple of years ago, but the line of reasoning is crucial. It's the prohibition of basic, naive, ontological questions, like, to be a little bit caricaturized. When you ask a radical Foucauldian, does this bottle exist? A Foucauldian answer would have been, let's look at the horizon of understanding or episteme within which you can raise this question. You know, they would say, you cannot directly ask, does this exist? You always ask this question within a certain horizon. For example, if you ask a Foucauldian, does man have immortal soul? His answer would have been, the notion of immortal soul only has meaning within certain philosophical, ideological horizon. And all we can do is bring out this implicit horizon into open. And we cannot go beyond. Germans have here a beautiful term, unhintergehbar. You cannot go behind it. That this is why for them, for transcendentalists, these direct ontological questions of being, like, does reality exist out there? In a way, in a quite justified way, as for example Heidegger does it in his being, they would have said, wait a minute, if you raise the question, does reality exist out there, you are already in the horizon of modern subjectivity. Such questions only emerge with modernity when you have, in the clear break with medieval times, this idea that there is out there, as Pascal put it, grey, indifferent reality, and here it's me with my universe of meaning, and then you get this problem, can I step outside this and reach reality? They would say, you are already within a certain horizon of being to raise this question. So, what I want to say is that the big problem, and that's what I like to solve in my books, my preferred book still now, book of mine, sorry, narcissistic beat is Absolute Recoil. where the whole first part is dealing with this problem. How to move beyond this transcendental horizon without regressing to some naive realism. Because on the one hand, it's clearly that I take this from Quentin Meillassoux, that transcendentalism cannot be the ultimate position. But on the other hand, it's impossible for us to adopt any simple objective position. In other words, to put ourselves directly into reality. I am that. I am that piece in reality. No, we are in it, not because I'm an idealist, but precisely because of materialism. To be able to put ourselves into reality, we would have somehow to step out of it. But we are not out, we are in. So okay, I will not go into all this more. What I want to say is this, that when, and you already put, you, the evil guy in the first row, you, don't now look, no, it's not me, it's you, fuck you, it's you. No, leave the blonde lady like Isolde there alone. Oh, you try to put the blame on her, no? She's like, no, it's not me, it's her, it's you. Sorry, it's my baseness.
I immediately thought I was evil.
No, sorry. No, what I want to say is that you asked me and you gave me some good formulas of how, insofar as we read Harman and the different level Latour and so on, as resorting to a simple realism, a view of reality where politics of things and ideological politics of language simply collapse together in a certain totality, I don't think this is possible. I think, let me do it in a very simple way. How does language relate to reality? First, we have naive realism. We simply say language is an instrument for representing reality. Things are out there, language relates to them. Then we have the opposite, reflexive transcendental position, where we say, but how things appear to us is always already mediated through language. That would be Heidegger's point with his house designs, that language is the house of being. The way being appears to us, entities, is always mediated through a certain horizon of understanding. For example, Heidegger's point, modernity means that reality appears to us basically as an object of possible scientific technological manipulation. Which is why, if you acknowledge poetry and so on, it's claimed, but this is just subjective. You don't reach reality with this. Reality out there, you reach it only again through science, technology, and so on. Then we have a third attempt, which would be maybe closest to what Latour and his friends, theoretical colleagues, try to do, this old Marxist notion of praxis, claiming that both naive realist or transcendental horizon presuppose that we are somehow outside reality and we either reflect it or totalize it transcendentally, like I, subject, am constitutive of reality. If I'm not, if I reflect it, I'm strictly still outside it. And everybody knows that's, for example, the mega mistake, philosophical, of Lenin's materialism and imperial criticism, which, with almost sympathy for Lenin, if one were to compose in this fashion of big hits 10 worst philosophical books in the history of humanity, that book by Lenin would come pretty close to the top. Why? Because, you know, Lenin gives there his famous definition of matter. Matter is any, without any qualification, reality which exists objectively out of subjective mind. My point is fine, then Plato is a materialist in this sense. For him, idea definitely exists outside our mind. You see what's the problem? The problem is not reality outside my mind. The problem is that I am part of reality. If you say reality is outside my mind, yes and no. No, not because not because I'm independent of reality, but reality is not outside, because I'm part of reality. All my illusions and so on are part of reality. That's why I don't think the proper realism is this one. Get rid of subjective illusions, how I distort reality, and we will get some pure reality, some pure mathematical formula. That reality is the purest. Okay, so I'm saying that then the third option, popular in some Marxism, would be the notion of practice, where the point is you find different versions of it, even in late Wittgenstein and so on. The idea being that language is a material practice, not just material, in the sense of, to quote Austin, with language we do things. Language is part of a life form. For example, this is very nicely done with some, now it's no longer so fashionable, when I was young it was speech act theory. You know, how we do acts with language. We use language to seduce other people, to communicate, to collaborate with them. Language is a form of social activity and as such embedded in the totality of social activity. It's meaningless to analyze language outside of relations of power, production, and so on and so on. It's an organic part of it. This would be... What I tend to claim is that I don't accept this solution. I think that language, the fact of language, is a kind of a more radical ontological scandal. Language is linked to a gap in reality. In what sense? You know, people always like to emphasize, all these philosophers of practice, that we are not outside reality. Language is the way we work, socially intervene in reality. But where does this worry come from that I will not remain outside? I think, no. What happens with language, in what language is based, is some kind of minimal distance, what German idealists called negativity. That I acquire in an abyss a minimal distance towards reality. In the sense is, I am not in reality. I am in a void of reality. Even if I may refer here to some big mystical names, I mean, I'm not a mysticist. That's the point wonderfully described by great mystics as the night of the world. This moment of collapse of reality, the void. I am nothing. I am not part of reality. This is not idealism. I'm not saying I'm some substance outside and so on. Just the constitutive of language is, the problem is not how I fit into reality. The problem is, how is it possible that I have a distance, that I don't fit into reality. And because of this distance, I cannot ever locate myself fully into reality. Every structure that I present, unity of politics of things and of symbolic value of things and so on, any structure like this is always predetermined by a certain symbolic horizon. You cannot get out of language. And again, I repeat it, this is not idealism. The point is just this. So again, we are in a way always caught in a circle. You cannot step outside yourself and look at reality objectively. But the big problem here, and this void is the space of subject. Subject is not some kind of a mega object, ultra active and so on. Subject is, as Hegel knew it, the name for a gap in reality, or to put it in the terms of German idealism, again, negativity. To put it in terms of Freud, death drive. You should be very careful by Freud here. Freud's death drive has nothing to do. Freud, as all great thinkers, at the moment of his greatest invention, he missed the point. He retranslated his own death drive into some stupid longing to die and so on and so on. No. You know who gave here a wonderful formulation? I envy him. I quote him in the last chapter of my disparity book, my good friend Aaron Schuster. He, in a wonderful way, he shows where Lacan, in a justified way, criticizes Sade. You know that in Sade, we have this distinction between first death and second death. For Sade, he began as a brutal materialist. Why should we kill and torture? Because it's part of nature. Nature is this eternal process where everything changes, things are born, they die. So, outside all morality, we should act as part of nature. Then, Sade, who wanted a radical liberation, got the right idea that even in this way we remain slaves of nature. So then Sade came to the idea of a radical crime. Of a crime which does not only bring death as part of this eternal cycle of generation corruption, but interrupts this circle itself. Kills not just elements in nature, but kills the natural cycle itself. And as Lacan points out nicely, the Sade's mistake was that he didn't see that what he calls second death, this radical interruption of natural cycle, is not, Sade projected this disruption into reality itself and thought it must be some mega catastrophe, the end of the world. He didn't see that, as Lacan puts it in an ingenious, precise way, he didn't see that second death precedes the first death. Second death always already happened the moment we are speaking beings. Second death means this minimal denaturalization. We are not part of nature, this, again, what mystic calls the night of the world, what Freud calls death drive, this minimal interruption of the natural cycle. In this sense, for Freud, sexuality and death drive belong together. Not because in sexuality you look for obliteration and so on, but because precisely for Freud, human sexuality is something which interrupts natural cycle. In the natural cycle, sexuality is part of a regular rhythm. You have the mating season, blah, blah, blah. If you are a passionate human being, you go crazy. It's like Tristan and Isolde. You want, it's an absolute all the time and so on. So what I want to say, again, back to my final point, is that this is my reproach, among others, to assemblage theory. It was very unsatisfactory today, but just to give you a hint where I will go on tomorrow, in a wonderful point, Graham Harman says that, and here I agree with his privilege of stable object over change, but I read it against him. He claims that we learn what is an object through its point of failure, through its limitations. More than to learn what is an object, you have to look where it fails. What it cannot do, not what it can do. But I agree with it, but not in his sense. The way I would read it is how, just to give you an idea, I quote in somewhere, for example, criticize, you know John Caputo, the American theological deconstructionist. He criticized once me and Badiou in this sense. He said, why are we so obsessed by this monster fetish of capitalism? And he says, if you give me Swedish-style social democracy, social security, human rights, healthcare, if you give me all this, I can well live with capitalism. Yes, if you can, but for structural reasons you cannot. You know, the key when you analyze a certain assemblage and you try to bring out its potentials, what can be done, the most interesting point of ideology for me is to isolate those features which appear possible but are de facto impossible. Every ideological field has some point like this. Like, it appears possible, but de facto it shouldn't be possible. And with this we can begin, we can return to my earlier points, I didn't even maybe develop them here, which always fascinate me of how every ideology allows you to do things, but at a certain crucial point, you are allowed to do it on condition that you don't do it. And this brings out, I think I mentioned them here, maybe last year, not now, wonderful paradoxes of how you are officially allowed to do something on condition that you don't do it. And we can go even a step further. This prohibition, like you are allowed to do it, but really it's prohibited to do it. This prohibition is itself prohibited. In the sense that, no, if it's mystical, let me conclude with an old joke that I used here already 4 or 5 times. I repeat it so often that I'm bored by it. Imagine, sorry, old joke, most of you know it. We are in Soviet Union, 35, golden era of Stalinism. I'm Stalin, I give a speech, then there is a debate. One of you stands up and criticizes me. Ha ha ha. Next day, the last time you've seen him. Like, let's say, then another guy stands up and shouts at the first guy, "Are you crazy? We don't criticize Comrade Stalin here, it's prohibited." He would have disappeared even faster. You see, in Stalinism, it was prohibited to criticize Stalin. But it was also absolutely prohibited to state this prohibition explicitly. So what interests me are these immanent impossibilities. In this sense, to understand capitalism, we have to understand its failure. It promises something that a priori, structurally, it cannot deliver. That's why a friend of mine, a black theologist, in a wonderful way, called this Caputo's capitalism, where you have enjoy everything, Caputolism. You know, he wants Caputolism, where you have healthcare, everything. Well, it would be nice if you can, but you cannot. You know what? I got lost now. I promise you tomorrow we go much more into these precise things of structural failure and so on. And then you gave me the idea. I remember it said how Latour is more complex. He knows that this collaboration of 2 levels is always relative. How to reach it in itself from here. It was confused. I apologize for what I did today. But I feel a little bit more fresh that we at least approach theory a little bit, and tomorrow we go to the end. Although I'm already glad in advance of being able to cheat you. Unfortunately, there will not be enough time and so on. You know? But I will keep my word. If I will not come to the end, you get through. Is she here, Madison? You are. Okay. Okay. So I must not say anything bad against you, you know. Alain Badiou, I gave him a triumphant answer. Once accused me that only behind his back I'm telling all the dirty stories which are horrible, but I tell them in French. Like, you know which movies Alain Badiou likes?
Which one?
I hope you did see it, it's horrible. He thinks it's a masterpiece. Bridges of the Madison County, not to mention Titanic and so on. But you attacked me, why are you saying this behind my back? And I told you, because I'm a humanist. If I tell you this to your face, it would hurt you. So it's my great respect for you that I'm only saying bad things behind your back. So Madison, unfortunately, I will not say it now, but probably you will get tomorrow a text to distribute to them, no? And we are here tomorrow at the same time we finish. If you pardon me, we do have, like today, we can go some 10 minutes over and so on. Or is it a limit?
No, we can go over.
Sorry?
We can go over,
Tomorrow.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
10 minutes, yeah.
No, because now I'm tired.
Yes.
I'm in a bad mood, I'm tired of life and so on. But well, no, you know why? Because I would nonetheless also like, after a substantial part, to give you a chance to counterattack. And please, this is not an empty offer to be rejected. Since I talk too much, please, really, I mean it, I'm not cheating. It's not like, oh, I will pay it, then you count that the other guy will pay. No, I will pay it. Please simply interrupt me and ask a question in the middle. Because otherwise, I don't think you will get many chances. No? But I would really like for you to do it. Unfortunately, I will not be able to do it then what I wanted to do, what I promised already the last time. the analysis of the circularity of time through some relatively interesting science fiction movies. They are not ingenious movies, but the theoretical problems they give, they generate are interesting. I think I already mentioned them when I was here a couple of months ago. Like, did you see Arrival and Discovery? Pretty interesting movies. Again, I'm not saying they are great movies. I'm saying that these paradoxes of, for example, did you see Arrival, those squid heptapods which come? I think, you know what's the crucial point of Arrival for me? They come here to humanity because they know that 300 years from now they will need our help. But we are stupid humans, partial, they have the holistic approach. How can we help them? The only answer is the Hegelian one. They know that their complete holistic knowledge is too stupid. They need our one side. It's a very deep subversive insight in that movie. It's not at all what it appears to be, just celebrating this holistic mind, whatever, you know. Also, that one, download it, Propaganda for Pirate Bay. It's The Discovery with Robert Redford. He plays a partial role. It's a wonderful theory where a guy, scientist, old, Robert Redford played by, discovers, it looked idealist, but it's not. He's a scientist who discovers that the soul survives the death of the body. My God, I almost wanted to burn the movie like Goebbels. Then I discovered it's more interesting. He discovers this, but first it's a materialist explanation, just some stupid electromagnetic waves survive. Then he thinks that you get some things from the future and so on, but then at the end a wonderful fact is established that what survives is that if you make some mega mistakes, miss the points in your life, at the moment of death, that's the mind which survives, you try to return back and do in a new way, repeat all your mistakes. It's a nice idea. It's maybe the best idea of immortality. Not, oh, I live endlessly, but just to, and of course, just to go back and correct your mistakes. And in a wonderful way, this complicates things. It's a nice, intelligent movie. I almost begin to believe in these mega productions, Guardians or whatever. They are so boring. I'm beginning to believe in this new subgenre of relatively modest. Okay, modest means $5 to $10 million. My God, I kill my mother if you give them to me, but you know what I mean. These relatively modest, intelligent science fiction movies which focus on one crucial problem. We will not have time for this, but I can maybe also, if you want, send you a text or whatever, you know. So, thanks very much. I'm tired now, so see you tomorrow at 3 and we can go a little bit further. Thanks very much.
John.